Say hello, everyone. Tell us your names and where you're dialing in from. Again, I'm Fatma. I'm the head of community at ThinkHuman, and I'm dialing in from Mexico City. Oh, we have a few people here. We have Auckland from Lancaster as well. Welcome. Welcome, Joe. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you. Francesca is based in Brooklyn. Okay, I think people are coming in right now. Laguna Hills, welcome Dory. Chowlett from SLC, welcome. Welcome Stella from Vancouver. Thank you all for joining. We're happy to have you and to dive into this conversation today. We know that in the past 2 years, a lot had changed in our work environments and our life designs and us as teams as well. And so as we adapt to a new world of work and a new environment of work as well, it'll be interesting for us to redefine how we integrate work into our lives and also how our companies interacting with our needs and wants. And so today we're going to talk about the return to office. You want to call it hybrid work, but that's the conversation today. So as you're getting settled, we would love to get the conversation started. I see that you put your names and where you're calling in from in the chat, and thank you for that. We're going to be using that chat actually today to integrate you into the conversation. So this is not just you watching the webinar. We want to have your comments, your questions, and include them in the conversation as well. Francesca, our moderator here, would do her best to integrate that. So let us know what is important for you to know today. Like, why are you joining the conversation? How do you, as people leaders, are starting to adapt to hybrid work? Please let us know in the chat. Maybe I have the time to read a few of them. All right, let's just move. Okay, so before we continue diving into the conversation, I would love to introduce ThinkHuman. This is the group that you have here that is going to be leading the conversation today. ThinkHuman unleashes the soul in business by equipping people leaders with the skills they need to lead effectively, compassionately, and inclusively. We do this work through cohort-based leadership journeys focused on increasing emotional intelligence and creating spaces for true mindset shift and long-lasting behavioral change. Today, Francesca is going to be leading our conversation. She brings a people-centric therapeutic lens to her work, and she's an expert in education, corporate, and nonprofit spaces with the intention of having individual experiences that fulfill them as humans inside of liberated workspaces. She also is a facilitator at ThinkHuman. And now we're gonna hand it over, if we're gonna still have that, to Sane. Sane, are you still here? Because I received a message saying that she had a technical problem, but I'm not sure about that. Oh, I have technical difficulties. Okay, that's fine. Francesca, we're just gonna turn it over to you. Thank you for leading the conversation today and looking forward to it. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Fatma, for that. And Lauren and Meredith, thank you both for being in this conversation with us today. Lauren, our head of growth at ThinkHuman, Meredith, our CEO and founder. And, you know, one thing that I want to also mention, you know, we are talking about this question of adapting to hybrid work, really like inside of a larger context of, you know, COVID and kind of the transition back into workspaces, you know, as a result. But I also want to make sure that we even go a little bit even more meta, right? And even COVID was happening inside of an even larger context, a context of racial injustice, of systematic oppressions, right? That have been really happening in this country and globally for a long time. And so all of that is really impacting our experience as workers, right? And what adapting to the hybrid work environment looks like for us. And so I'd be so curious to hear from the both of you, you know, what your relationship to hybrid work is, both from a human, right, perspective, but also as people leaders. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Lauren, you want to jump in first?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think hybrid work has been a big part of my career. I've been a sales professional for most of my working career. I've been a sales leader, leading teams in that way, and especially in the technology and high growth kind of startup world, it's very common. And you have salespeople always on the road. We're not in the office as much as other employees. And so the sales orgs I've been in have always been kind of geared towards this hybrid work. And so like in the office, pure all the time work has never really resonated with me. And it's been something that I think like the transition we've had has been easier for me as an individual because I have experienced that for so long and I'm used to it. But a lot of people I'm hearing from, especially those that have never had that experience, are really struggling with how do I connect with my coworkers? How do I really have that physical one-on-one connection or camaraderie that we used to have in the office? And I do think that's where hybrid over like full remote really shines, is giving people that in-person place as well to go, whether it's something full-time or more of a part-time kind of office setup for companies. So I mean, that's how I've resonated with it, and hybrid has been a really successful model for me in my career.
Awesome. So Lauren, I'm hearing you say that, while thinking about hybrid work is, a challenge for many companies who are thinking about it for the first time and figuring out how to make it happen concretely for the first time. For you as an employee, you found it, you found a lot of success in this particular model. And so that's kind of helpful context to kind of go in with. Meredith, anything you want to share?
Yeah. So firstly, ThinkHuman has always been a fully distributed company. So although we've had office space that people can convene, people have been distributed since our inception and worked remotely regardless of role. So we've had a lot of time to figure out that kind of distributed workforce model. That said, I think for every company, including ours, the last year and a half has brought many demands that we had to figure out how to adjust to quickly, and has forced pioneering a lot of new things and having to figure them out in real time with the grace of our team members. Like, all right, we're all just in this together, pioneering together. And I think this last year and a half has brought, first this adjustment to distributed work for people, many of whom were totally in office and had to figure out how to be distributed, and now have to move back to some, in-office hybrid remote situation, adjusting yet again in the context of a huge amount of stressors. So it's not just hybrid work that we're adjusting to. We're adjusting to hybrid work inside of an ongoing pandemic, inside of the burnout that has resulted from the last year and a half, inside the context of the burnout that was already there, and then the racial justice issues that have been front and center for the last year and change, but have been existing for a long time. So I just think looking at hybrid work in isolation is like inside of all these other conditions and the stresses that those bring. So we're navigating all of it at once. And I think those stressors have brought to the foreground, in some ways, people prioritizing life priorities in a new and different way. So where historically the company's needs trump all, we now are finding like, oh, wow, like in the last year, I realized fill in the blank. People have realized the Great Resignation, I think, is just largely driven by fill in the blank. I realized, whatever it was, commuting to work was getting, meant I couldn't be there for, this is not me, but just for someone, we meant I couldn't be there for my kids in the evening, or for so many people in underrepresented groups realizing, wow, the microaggressions that I experienced at work really diminished for me in certain ways being in my own home, and I don't have to confront those in the same way. So I think that was a very long-winded way of me saying, I think that we are being confronted with having to find new ways of working, but those challenges are really, in many ways, in the service of like human interest and really taking care of people and letting people prioritize their own well-being, and then navigating, okay, so if it isn't the sacrifice of the human for the sake of the company, how do we have humans be well and the company be well?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really important that you kind of bring up this a couple of things. One, kind of like the experiences like of individuals with marginalized identities, right? And what even thinking about return to office and hybrid work even looks like for those communities. I know for myself, it's definitely something that I've grappled with as well, right? And for me, I've had even my own fill in the blank moments, right? Of what has kind of been the paradigm that has kind of been created in workplaces and hybrid work, almost like allowing an opportunity to kind of reimagine, right? One, get in touch with what my needs are, right, as a person and as an employee. But two, kind of, even think about what the needs of my team are, right? From a even more macro perspective. And so I love some of these things that you're bringing in, and also this question of the needs of the company and the needs of the employees, right? And specifically of the people. And I think that's even a really interesting kind of conversation that I know we're going to get into as we continue with this, with our conversation today. But I want us to make sure that we're holding that, right? Because those are two really important distinctions there. And so you both kind of started to bring up some of the issues and some of the challenges that sort of come up that you've maybe experienced or you've heard others talk about. And so I'm curious, what do you think is kind of what do you think is the roadblock maybe for people leaders who are trying to even begin the process of conceptualizing what hybrid work looks like? What do you think some of the roadblocks and challenges are that people leaders need to really be thinking about and considering?
I can jump in on this one. Oh, go, Lauren, please.
One thing I think that really stands out to me is how to trust. How to trust people that when they aren't in the office. I think leaders are quite often stuck on this automatic or this old system of the way we have to do business. And there's typically generational differences, I think, between that and the timing of the pandemic happening and pushing us into almost fully remote for a while, and now we're navigating this new world. I think it does give us a real opportunity to reimagine a world of work. And I think we're at a time point where we have a generation coming into the workforce, Gen Z, that are digital natives, that don't want to be stuck in an office, that don't want to adhere to traditional ways of working. And this was going to happen anyways. We were heading towards this. And I think we've had a crash course as a global workforce as to what can this look like and how do we as leaders adapt? How do we trust our employees? How do we make sure that they're not burning out? How do we make sure that they're taking time for themselves as well, and that we can connect? I think there's a big culture question here. And so many companies, I think, for a long time, anchored culture to the office, to the ping pong table, right? If we think of like the tech startup kind of world, that it was all about food in the office and ping pong and video games and big screens and stuff. And how do we shift from that? If we don't have that as our like anchor for culture, who are we as a company for a lot of people? I think it's a real question that's happening.
Yeah, go for it, Meredith.
Yes to everything you just said, Lauren. A couple things to add on, and then or just like my plus ones, and then some additional thoughts. So I definitely think as it relates to remote work, most remote issues, like issues with remote work, are ultimately, I think, trust and control issues. So we diagnosed them initially as like, oh, remote has these issues. And I think they ultimately often come down to trust and control issues, which also sometimes come down to hiring and clear goal issues that if you have the right people in the right seats and they have clear goals, then, and you have good performance management in place to make sure that they are set up to win and fulfilling those goals, then you can trust and empower people to work in the office, out of the office, but it requires the right person, seat, goals, and performance management. So those are places, those are things that can be obstacles and that can be navigated by people leaders. I also think the other big thing that has to be reimagined right now, to Lauren's point, is what is culture in a hybrid environment? And how do we create that in a way that tends to the needs of all different constituents? So Lauren pointed out it was like the ping pong tables and enthusiasm in the office and the big screens, which really well serves the extroverts, which is super important. And sometimes the introverts are like, oh, I'm dying inside. Like, can I just close the door? And that's actually not the culture that supports me to feel really connected. And I have to like generate all my enthusiasm and then go like hide in a closet after that. So again, in the pioneering new ways that we create that interstitial glue that serve different people's needs. So that's in the list of obstacles. I also want to add that I think one of the biggest obstacles is, or biggest issues, is understanding that the hybrid issue, and two people said it right at the beginning of this in the chat about this being a two-caste system. I saw Amy and somebody else in the chat put that in, and thank you. I think that ultimately this hybrid work situation, at the heart of it, is an inclusion issue, and managers or people leaders in the office have to navigate through their own power dynamics and preferences. Like, if I'm a manager and I like to be in the office and I want my people in the office, then the people should be in the office. And if they're not in the office, okay. So now I'm tolerating that they're not in the office, but not exactly getting my way. Or maybe I'm okay that they're not in the office, but I have a bias toward unconsciously, unintentionally, toward, all right, who am I giving work to because they're right here in front of me, and who gets opportunity because they're right here in front of me, and who gets space time because they're right here in front of me, and who gets coaching and development time because they're right here in front of me. And it takes a lot of intention to, as a people leader, make sure our time and opportunities that we're giving out and delegation and team structure is equitably distributed between in-person and distributed team members. And reframing, I think that it really takes a servant leader mindset. Let me just put it that way. That are we putting our own preferences, like I like IRL, so the team should be IRL, and then we're kind of at the top of the pyramid structure? Or in that servant leader mindset, I might like X, but what does the team want and need? And then how do we design that so everybody can be at their best?
Goodness, you said so many good things in there, Meredith. And something that really comes to mind for me is this question of, like, in these spaces, right? And when we're making these decisions, like, who has the power, right? Who has the power? And then, like, what is a trickle down effect of those decisions? And so, I even as I think about myself and something that came up with this question of, like, introversion, right? And extroversion and what that looks like. And as a self-proclaimed introvert myself, I mean, one of the things though that really stood out to me in this transition is thinking about, am I actually an introvert, right? Like, is it really about introversion for me, or is it about how connected I feel, right? To, the people and to the culture, right? Is it about introversion, or is it about whether or not I feel like I can show up authentically, right? And so, so many questions, I think, kind of emerge from this, but also those very same questions kind of inform, I think, for myself and maybe for others, kind of inform their reasons or decisions for whether or not they want to, come back in person or not. And so I'm curious, like, as we think about, like, from a people leader perspective, right? how do you kind of hold, like what you all were kind of just talking about in terms of like some people, leaders wanting people back in person because that's their preference, right? How do you kind of hold that and also hold the fact that there might be employees or other people, leaders who maybe have a different perspective? And how do you kind of like negotiate between that tension of who wants to be back in person and who maybe is enjoying the more hybrid or virtual format?
Mary, you want to take this one first?
Sure. I think there's a context setting in an organization, and then I think there are tools to support managers. So in the context setting, I think there's some things you have to get clear about as an organization. And do you believe that when people are set up well and doing well, that tends to have the company do better? If you do believe that when people are set up so they are well, that has the company do better, if you think that that's a critical ingredient, that changes the orientation to this question. Because then you're like, all right, well, if the company's bottom line is going to do better when the people are doing better, then I need to understand what's going to have them well set up. And that's not a one size fits all. That's really unique by individual. And then we can give people, managers, tools to navigate, like, all right, well, how do I, what structure can I look at to see that I am giving equitable distribution of projects? What structures can I use to see that that my one-on-one time is distributed fairly, and that kind of social grease time isn't tending toward a certain group, but even that social grease time is that social time, not formal one-on-one time, is equitably distributed. Like, there are tools that you can look at as a manager and say, like, all right, like, let me track myself and see how I'm doing. But you only do those things once you're inside a context for is it a critical ingredient here inside the company for my people to really be at their best? And that's not a one size fits all. I want to just say one more thing before I turn it over to you, Lauren, which is that in terms of this being an inclusion and equity question, I think another important layer is something you've mentioned, Francesca, which is, and that I touched on briefly too, which is that people in underrepresented groups, there's now solid data, are less inclined to want to be back in offices. And now if they're staying remote or even largely remote, it introduces a brand new dimension of bias and obstacle that a person in an underrepresented group now has to face. So it's like, okay, I got this level of my intersectionality that I have to navigate, and this one, and now hybrid on top of it. And I think it really behooves companies and managers to take the time to appreciate this hybrid situation in the context of equity and intersectionality and what people are navigating, because it can slow down the like, oh, I just want to get the work done, to, all right, I want diverse perspectives and everybody to be bringing their best. And how, as a manager, do I need to flex so that I can make that happen?
Yes.
Lauren, what do you think?
I think that flexing bit is so important, because I think in like traditional leadership, like you said earlier, Meredith, it's top down. It's how I perform best as a leader, and my team kind of follows me. And now it's really about teaching leaders to listen, teaching leaders to become more emotionally intelligent and be able to engage with their teams on a deeper level, so that we can like create a sense of psychological safety where employees can say, actually, this is how I would prefer to work, or this is not working for me, or this is really working for me. And then us as leaders today, I do think there is an additional burden that comes on with a hybrid workforce, and an additional kind of sensitivity you have to the humans on your team, an additional bit of care in that the decisions that you make could contribute to bias, could contribute to people feeling excluded, right? If you like grab the team that's in the office and go out to lunch, and there's a couple of people that aren't in the office, they're going to feel like, oh, why, everyone's going to team lunch, they're getting to bond and do that and feel left out. So I think it's an extra level of care that leaders need to learn to take as we start navigating this new normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one thing that, as you both were speaking, that came to mind for me is like the importance of like, as a people leader, like really being able to step into the perspective of the other, right? I mean, I know for me, there's kind of like this double consciousness that I was navigating, particularly at the very height of the pandemic when we all were remote. This question of, how am I being perceived and how am I thinking about myself? And so, for instance, like, what will people think, right, of me if I'm not, responding within 30 seconds of getting something? Or what will people think of me if I'm not going above and beyond to take on additional projects, even though my plate is already overflowing, right? And that like level of like energy that goes into that, as a people leader, like if you're not really thinking about like all of the dimensions of it, right? And also like creating the intentional opportunities to connect with your employees and check in on them and see how they're doing, how mentally, right? You kind of miss that, right? Unintentionally. And there can then kind of be some opportunities for inequities that can arise. And so, as we kind of think about that with that framing, I'm curious to hear from both of you kind of, we also know that there's a rise in kind of thinking about the importance of mental health. And so you talked about psychological safety a bit, but also like people's mental health and well-being is really being impacted by this kind of context as well. And so what are some of the things that you all believe as people leaders that others can kind of do to really be focusing in and really like providing that care for their employees, while also kind of, navigating, like creating policies, right? Like, and figuring out like what it means to kind of create a new hybrid work dynamic.
Lauren, you want to jump in first?
If you've got something, go right at it.
Yeah, I think that there's development for managers, and then I think there's tools. So the development is, the World Economic Forum has been saying it for the last 5 or 10 years, that one of the top 10 skills most needed in the new world of work is emotional intelligence. And so, technical expertise and the ability to bang things out and oversee results, all those things are useful, but those people leaders who can set up a team of people who are all different and have different needs to all be able to thrive themselves, that requires emotional intelligence, which is something that we know can be developed. It's not like a have it or don't have it. Now, maybe you're somebody on this call who's like, well, I think you got a starting point and you're only going to grow a certain amount from there. Maybe that's even true. Like some people are starting at a different starting point than others, but it's also well documented that everybody can grow on that spectrum of emotional intelligence. So devoting development resources, time, and energy to the emotional intelligence of people leaders. I think that's one critical thing. And then the more EQ gets developed, the fewer tools you need. Tools like, what are the questions to ask in a one-on-one to see how my people are doing? And that, and you can, I think most in larger companies, those kinds of resources exist, but feel free to put it in the chat if you're like, we want a list of those questions. We have some of those lists that we can share out with you. Just what kind of tools can you equip managers with so that they can sit in a one-on-one and be focused on the human, not just on the work. That's one thing. I think there's also, in addition to being attuned to the well-being and emotional health of people on your team, is noticing how much additional trauma you're creating. And so that's like, we're actually exacerbating the mental health issues by the work trauma that takes place, whether that's from micro and macro aggressions, or just from low psychological safety and the kind of shame and blame that can get thrown around at work, or now with this new hybrid dimension. It is like a new domain that now can create trauma. Like, oh, I was left out of that meeting. Why? What did that mean? Why did they have that meeting without me? Or that meeting is all happening in person and they're all sitting around a table and me and one other person are sitting on the screen, like, waving in from the sidelines, but not able to get our voices into the conversation meaningfully. So I think that we need to be attentive to people's emotional health, but also the things that we're doing that are either exacerbating and dialing up mental health issues or dialing them down.
You're spot on there. And I think that quite often when mental health comes up, it's typically like, what support can we get the employee? How can the employee help themselves? And I think we have to step back as leaders in organizations and be like, what systemically can we change? What is part of our processes? What is part of the way that we do, quote, business as usual? Do we need to shift and adjust to create a more emotionally intelligent and like psychologically safe workplace? I do also think that those support mechanisms are incredibly important. I think your company needs to have an excellent mental health care plan. You need to give people coaching opportunities outside of their leaders, but their leaders need to be trained to be more as like coaches and partners to their team. It's not like, once again, top down, it's more servant leadership. It's what can I do to support my team? How can I reduce the amount of trauma and mental health issues that can occur in the workplace, because so much is happening outside in the world right now. We need to reduce what we can control and support our teams in things that we can't.
I just want to jump in with one more thing that I just thought of that is exacerbating right now, that the burn that people can feel from hybrid work, which is people working across time zones and being like, all right, I went into the office, I spent 8 hours, but I have teams doing asynchronous work in other time zones. And now I have to be responding to those things, or people working different hours and not having clear articulated guidelines of what is expected about when people are on Slack, when people are on email, what response times are. So people are like, all right, it's now just a 24/7 game and I got to be on all the time or I look bad, especially if I'm remote because I'm already navigating not being IRL with my boss.
Yeah, and as you all are kind of talking about this, like there's so many different dimensions, right? I mean, even Elisa just put in the chat, like this is a huge shift, and like the concern of like how you're gonna get everything done, right? Like trying to figure out as a people leader how to navigate this kind of this shift, this new world that we're kind of going into, and also figuring out how to get all of the other things done. And so I think people are kind of in the space where they want to kind of know like what are some tactical things that they can kind of put in their toolbox to really feel supported in this. And I know, Meredith, one of the things that we talked about when we had our own conversation is this concept of a global first, right?
Right.
And so I'm curious to know if you can kind of talk a little bit about that as one of the tools that people leaders can kind of put in their toolbox.
Great. So I love that. Thank you for teeing that up, Francesca. And I do think that some of the ways of navigating are simpler and less time intensive than we may fear. Like, yes, we are pioneering something. And when we're pioneering, we're trying things, iterating, succeeding, failing, trying new things. And that does take something. So I'm not diminishing that that experimentation takes a certain amount of energy and effort, but there are people that have figured out a lot of stuff already. So one of them is this idea of running hybrid teams in this, what we've heard it called by clients is global first effort, where you have team that's in, some team that's in Asia, some team that's in Ukraine, some team that's in Santa Monica. Hypothetically, your team may be just spread out all over New York City. It doesn't matter, but go with the analogy. So teams spread out all over, and the team that's in Santa Monica is all in person, will run the meetings global first, which means it doesn't matter where people are. Everybody's plugged into a computer with a headset on, and everybody's a face in a box instead of You got some people sitting around a conference table and they can all see and hear each other well. And then you have the remote people who all live as one tiny little square on a box. So running meetings global first, which means being thoughtful about time zone, if that's an issue, having time zones rotate and within a certain band, so nobody is feeling the burn worse than another. And when there are team meetings, running them global first, where everybody's plugged in with headphones, no matter whether they're IRL or not.
Absolutely. And I think that really kind of speaks to and addresses the equity and the unconscious bias piece that you were talking about before, of like people who are in person, maybe having more access to coaching development opportunities, right? And that ultimately has the potential to lead to growth in a company, right? That maybe if those who are not in person might not have as much access. And so a global first perspective kind of helps to, in some ways, level the playing field a little bit. So I appreciate you kind of talking through that a little bit. Either Meredith or Lauren, any other kind of tactical things that you feel like people leaders can really take on?
Yeah, I would like to say one more thing. I know I'm really piling on here. Sorry, Lauren, but just one thing and then I'll turn it over to you. I think people can sometimes get freaked out by this idea of global first, like, but what does that mean? Like, I can't have team meetings just with my team. Like, here we are. That's super weird. It's like, no, it's not that you can't have team meetings with your team. Like, if you have, if you're having a one-on-one or a two-on-one and everybody's in the office and you don't have remote people, great, do those meetings in person to get that yummy FaceTime. It's not like you can't get the FaceTime. Do it, and it feels, like that's good. You should invest in those things. But in those moments where you now have multiple people that are not in the office, then you make the shift. And I think, and people imagine the shift is like there's a mental block to it. Like, I just don't like that. I want us all to be sitting around the conference table. And my advice is do the experimenting and try it and see what happens in terms of the equalizing of voices and what that provides. And then maybe you'll decide like, okay, we're going to work that in sometimes. You can find your own recipe, but don't just like, that doesn't feel like us. Let's not try it. I say like, go for the experiment and then assess. The other thing is that one-on-ones, people have hopefully already always been doing some version of non-transactional one-on-ones. Not all managers we know, but many. And so this is just about using that time. It's not about adding more time. It's about using that time to be like, all right, how are you as a human? What do you need from me? How is this hybrid situation working for you? What adjustments can I and the company and the team make? Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Now let's move on to whatever is on your list. So it's not like a new process we're putting in place. It's using one-on-ones to make sure you are getting the feedback, hearing the feedback, making it safe for people to give it. If you're not, there's like the whole emperor wears no clothes. If nobody's telling you anything, it's probably because you're not making it safe. So making it safe and then asking the questions. Lauren, over to you. Sorry for my.
No, I think as you were talking, like something that I've been thinking about a lot is I think we're really in the need for a mindset shift in, I think we still, like, as we talk about hybrid work, we tend to think of like the office as the default. And I think we have to switch that to remote as the default in our mindset. And it's almost like, think of the office as like analog and remote as digital. We really have to move into a digital first space. And whenever we come into the analog, when we are face to face, make the most of those moments. Like I think some companies I've seen out there thinking about like pushing people to come back to work a certain amount of days of the week in the office. What are you going to do during those days that is more productive in person than not remote? I think the worst thing you could do is require people to go back to the office for a couple of days and they just sit around at a desk doing the same thing they could have done without commuting. So really value those in-office moments as experiential points. Like that's where you can get that in-person culture and that connection. So use that time valuably because it takes more to do it.
I mean,
I just want to.
No, go for it, Meredith. I'm getting
No, you Francesca, please.
Go. I think I'm thinking about like this. In other words, what we are also kind of having the opportunity to do as people leaders is ask the question of why. Why do we do the things that we do, right? There are a lot of things that we do them out of habit just because they've been done a particular way. And this is really an opportunity for us to think like, okay, why are we doing this? Lauren, to the point that you just made, like if the policy is, well, we're going to have people come back in person for X amount of days, right? Why? Right? Like, is there something that, like you mentioned, that we are doing that is this kind of really kind of salient in person that you kind of lose, right? Like, remote. If not, then it's really an opportunity for us to really reimagine and question everything that we've been doing. And so in some ways, there's some excitement, I think, that kind of comes in this opportunity of transition. So I just really wanted to say that. Meredith, I'm so sorry. Go for it.
No, I love it. I think that listen, COVID and the racial justice issues that have happened in that last year are a tragedy and a disaster. And I'm not trying to paint a poo bag pink. I'm like, it's been awful, but there have been some good outcomes. And some of the good outcomes are people discovering they can work in different ways that serve them better. And we're at another one of those crossroads. Like, all right, how do we now navigate this new crossroads in a way that serves people better? I will say there are some people on our team at ThinkHuman who have been kind of dying inside over the last year for lack of connection. And, doing all the things of happy hours online and dance parties of personally, social time with their friends. Like, it's not like they have been sitting alone in a closet, but for those people who are like, I really need to hug humans and be around them and like have that interaction, like human to human, it's taken a real toll. And so now as the world is, we're coming to these moments where it's like, okay, there's new openings. How do we take care of the people that really like hunger for that kind of connection, and that they can get that connection, have that supported, invested in, so they can be at their best, most inspired, so they can bring their best, speaking of like mental well-being, and at the same time, not making all connection about in-person connection. Because not everybody gets off with like, oh yeah, that's the way I want to connect. There are tons of people that are like, that's not actually how I connect best. So having multiple ways that connection is happening, connection opportunities happening in real life, connection opportunities ongoingly happening in virtual worlds, and giving people an array to plug into.
So spot on, Mayor. As you know, I'm one of those people who have been gutted by this. I'm an extrovert. I love hugging people. I love being in person with people. As a sales professional, it's not even just about seeing my team. It's about seeing clients and people in person at conferences. And I think, for most of my career, I've been in that group that's benefiting from the way we defaulted to as work. And I had started to, before all the pandemic hit, that difference between introverts and extroverts in the office had started to come up, and I had started to really think about that. And now being on the receiving end of having it shift for me, like it has grown my empathy and understanding for how important that is for us to think about both sides and create something that is different than we've done before, create something that is aligned to what everybody needs, instead of just the quote unquote default that we've always done. And so it's about breaking out of that systemic way that we've just been indoctrinated to. This is the only way to do it. There's a million ways to do it. We created this a long time ago. This is not something that's the only way to do things. We can break it and we can try something new, and that's exciting. And I think
yes, plus 1,000 to everything you said, Lauren. And it's not that complex. Like we can be like, oh dang, like how are we going to do it now? There's like so many different ways we have to do it. No, not so many different ways. Just some more new, different ways. Like, just be experimental and notice bias. Like, are we in all things, but now this new dimension, like, are we veering toward favoritism and opportunity that takes care of connection for the people who love and have access to in person at the expense of those that are remote? Are we veering the other direction? And are we really supporting that all are included and there's no monolithic exemplar of one or the other, but like, how are the humans doing over here? How are the humans doing over here? Because they're all individual humans, and what do they need? And it's not, we overcomplicate it when we're like, oh, the problem's just too big. We can't do anything. It's like, it's really not. Try a few different things, see how they go, get a little feedback, try some more things.
Absolutely. And this is exactly a similar conversation that we often have when we're talking about like inclusivity, right? And diversity in the workplace, right? It's about really being collaborative, being creative, right? Seeing what's possible when you kind of really just lean into your curiosity and also like create the space for people to like give feedback and share honestly and authentically, like, what is it that I need to, like I was mentioning before, experience belonging inside of this dynamic. And so I think, I think this is a really like pivotal moment for us to really like do a lot of different things. And we're being pushed to do it, right? And again, it can be like, there can be grace in that. And also like, we can be really generative collectively as we all try to figure out like how to make this work, for all. And that ultimately is the essence of like inclusivity and like what we have been talking about for a very long time, but now we're talking about it in the context of adapting to hybrid work, right? So,
Yep.
So I think this is absolutely incredible. One thing that I want to make sure, Meredith.
I was just going to say, in the spirit of feedback, I recently got some, like, it kind of reiterated to me in the last 24 hours about some things we're not doing well. And as it relates to this and creating both, allocating clear budget for in-person get-togethers. I was like, all right, like a little humility. I like as many things that from me, I'm saying, like I want to be, it doesn't always feel good to have it pointed out, the things when you're already trying really hard to get it pointed out, the things that you're not doing well. And it's like, all right, thank you very much for being courageous enough to say what we're not doing well enough yet. I really appreciate it. And that is now on the list of things that we are considering resolving, and we'll get back to you to close that loop. And not that we're going to do every single thing that we get feedback about, but really bringing our humility to the boldness and bravery that it takes for people to give us that feedback about what we're not doing well yet, and then adjusting to learn. Sorry for jumping in with that, Francesca.
Oh my goodness, no, I think that is so important. And I think it also goes back to what Lauren was talking about in terms of like psychological safety, right? Like, do your people feel empowered to actually come to you with feedback that you can actually have the opportunity to do something with, right? And also one thing that I have always thought and have experienced myself is I can always tell if I'm still engaged with a team or with a company based on how open I am willing to be and how much feedback I am willing to give. And so in the moments where I've said, I'm not going to give any feedback anymore, you should be concerned, right? Because it means that I'm no longer engaged with the team, with the company, and I'm no longer interested in being collaborative and thinking about like, what are the opportunities for us and how can I be a part of like, creating different solutions for some of those opportunities. So I think I love that you interjected with that, because I think, again, this is another opportunity for people, leaders, to really even shift like their relationship to feedback, right? And like what it says about their culture. Yeah, Lauren, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just saying it's spot on. You do have to shift it as a people leader, especially now, and get rid of that like blame and shame, or that I've done something wrong, and take the feedback, grow from it, put things in place to move the conversation forward, and give yourself some grace. Like this is complicated. There's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions. It's okay.
Yes. And one thing I want to say,
and
and
to
I'm
that
looking in the
point,
chat. Yeah. No, Meredith, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, to Lauren's point about the feedback, all building on yours, I think the more people recognize the impact of their feedback, because they can feel that, oh, my feedback is I'm not shouting into the void. I'm like being heard, received, and not everything is being actioned on, but some things are, and I can see and feel that. It buys us a lot of grace with our teams that we're all in it together, that it's not, once again, about power dynamics. It's not like the person at the top of a pyramid making decisions that are then cascading down, but instead like, okay, leader in support of this team, and how are we working through this, and what's working and what's not, and then let's like consolidate what's really the shifts that we want to make, and then bring those forth inside our teams or inside our companies. And when people experience that leveling, like, oh, we're in this together, there's like permissions for the mistakes that we are invariably making together as we pioneer this new thing.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's kind of going back to that grace. One thing that I'm doing, and folks, if you've got questions, this is the time, because we're kind of in that Q&A period. But as you all are kind of putting in your questions, I do want to kind of, Meredith and Lauren, ask you all one more question. One of the biggest piece of feedback that I've often heard and even given myself is this question of kind of like hybrid work and even just kind of virtual work at large, kind of feeling like it's created a dynamic in which the personal and professional boundaries have kind of been blurred. And people have found had a really hard time like creating those boundaries. And so as people leaders, what do you think are some concrete ways that you can kind of support people in thinking about how to create those boundaries and communicating what those boundaries are, so that again we lessen the opportunities for burnout, right? And feeling like people can't really take that time for themselves.
Yes. Well, I saw Auburn put into the Q&A a question about video cameras on or off. And I think that's one really, really salient boundary, which is it might feel really good to have everybody's face on the screen for some people, but for others, it's energy draining and can be intrusive. Like, there are some people who are like, yeah, I get to do this meeting from home. And others who are like, you know what, I don't really so much want you seeing inside my home and the background and what's going on and who all I'm living with and whatever else is going on. And so respecting people's boundaries to have their cameras off when that's what's appropriate for them. And also, I think it's great. I mean, Stanford came out with some data in the last 6 months about the cognitive load that it is to be on camera all day, and that people's work performance improves if they have time to do audio only meetings. So finding those meetings and designating, like, either it's player's choice, be on screen or not, or certain types of meetings are just audio and we really don't need to be seeing each other's faces for those things. So that's one boundary. The other I already mentioned, but it's worth saying again, is just clarifying not just work hours, but communication hours. So people aren't feeling that kind of like I have to be on all the time, checking my Slack, checking my email, responding so that I look good, since I'm, especially if I'm not getting FaceTime. So work hours, communication hours, and camera guidelines. Lauren, what do you think?
I mean, I think you hit on 3 of my top ones as well. I think it's those 3 like allow you as an employee to say, this is the way I want to work. This is how much I'm willing to kind of let you into my life. And I think we've talked about it a lot in this webinar, but I think the key, people have to feel safe enough to create those boundaries. And that is really hard for most people to say, no, that's enough. I cannot respond, after a certain time period. I'm very comfortable not responding. and I will get to it as soon as I turn work back on in the morning, because I need to recharge as a human being, and I need to put lines between the work that I'm doing and my home life. And I think pre-pandemic, we were already seeing such an intrusion into people's home life and home time, with Slack and email constantly going. And I think it was exacerbated now with us being fully at home, and of course the lines are blurred. Look, we've got a bedroom, I've got a kitchen behind me. Like, we're in each other's homes with our cameras in this way right now. And so it I think does require that courage and comfort to say, these are my boundaries, this is how I'm going to work, and us as leaders to be like, to understand that and create a world where that's okay, and co-create something that aligns to their needs.
I love that, Lauren. And I think that sometimes in companies, we default to expecting that the individual should be able to set their own boundaries. And I mean, that's nice. We would like that to happen. That's good. I'm not saying we should take that autonomy and sovereignty away from people, but our organizational systems and expectations, said and unsaid, reinforce certain things. And this is something that someone on the ThinkHuman team had to point out to me over a long period of time. I was like, just answer the email or the Slack whenever. Don't worry about it. I'm not like, it's fine. I might send it on a Sunday at 5 a.m, but like, you can look at it, whatever. And she's like, no, just stop, put it on send, like on pause send, or set a company policy for when we're supposed to look and not look, because otherwise I and others feel like I'm, you might tell me personally that it's okay, but it's a burden that then lives on the team member, which is a systematic reinforcement of a certain type of oppression. So set the guidelines, make those guidelines super clear about, these are the hours you're expected to look at your email. And, if it's urgent, it's going to come as a text that says the house is on fire. Otherwise, you don't have to look at your Slack and your email.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I think this is so powerful. And, one thing that I want to kind of say is, Meredith, to your point, what you're actually also talking about is, in many ways, culture, right? Like, when we've often talked about culture as being really connected to the office, but this is an example of culture, but also kind of the expectation that people leaders are thinking intentionally about how they are modeling the culture that they say they have on their team and the ones that they want their team to experience. And so, and again, feedback became a beautiful vehicle for you to be able to see that perhaps there was an alignment there, right? And so I think this again, we're talking about hybrid work, but this conversation is really expanding way beyond just hybrid work. We're really thinking about how we can be creative and innovative in creating spaces that are inclusive, and honestly that are liberating for people. And so, as we kind of close, I'm just wanting to make sure that people's questions are kind of being answered, and I think we've got to it. I think so. But Meredith and Laura, if you see anything that I'm missing, let me know. But I think we've gotten to most people's questions, and so, yeah, Meredith.
I just want to say, like from the beginning of this call until now, people have put such brilliant things into the chat. And as you all are thinking of things we haven't gotten to, not just questions, but suggestions for the rest of this community, for things that you're doing or thinking about, please share those things too, because we learn, like the community learns and we learn. So love hearing your brilliance too.
Yes. And with that being said, I really want to kind of take this opportunity to Meredith and Lauren, thank you both for being in this dialogue with me and with us. And especially huge shout out to the ThinkHuman team that's in the background, kind of working to support us today. And of course, we cannot forget to thank the Culture Summit team for really creating the space for us to even have this conversation. And one thing, last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you people leaders and aspiring people leaders for being here in this space and in this conversation with us today. By virtue of simply just showing up to the session, You are showing us your commitment to showing up for your team. And we can't thank you enough for being inside of this inquiry with us. And so my request of you all, as we kind of move through and continue on with the rest of your conference sessions and the rest of your day, is that you continue to leverage the skill sets that you already have, is that you engage with your humanity, and that again, you really kind of, you know, think about how you can lean into this curiosity that you've already shown us and figure out how we can get really creative about creating workspaces that really are inclusive and work for everyone. So with that being said, thank you again for taking on this invitation and being in this conversation with us. And we at ThinkHuman would like to wish you all a wonderful rest of your conference and a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you so much for your time. Bye, you all.
Bye, all. Lauren and Francesca, love you both. Thank you for this conversation. So brilliant, you humans.
So much love. Love you both.
What a treat.
All right.